Good morning and welcome to The Point. This morning we're going to tackle an issue that creates considerable controversy, and that's trying to fix Michigan roads. As you know, on May 5th, you'll be asked to raise the sales tax to 7%. That's part of a much larger plan that would go to fix roads, but it would also go to do a number of other things, and that's where some people say this plan goes wrong. But this morning, Governor Rick Snyder explains the plan that he supports that was hammered out in lame duck session. Governor, as always, we appreciate you being here, although I do have a standing policy that I normally don't sit down to talk with politicians that have large chunks of concrete in their hands. We'll make an exception, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But obviously one of the big issues, perhaps the biggest issue facing the state right now, I know the budget work is going on over in the legislature, but it really does have to do with this roads proposal coming up. And there is a lot of comment, there's a lot of confusion. I'm getting a lot of emails about it, so it's starting to ramp up. But let's start with this and what this is emblematic of.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on the show, Rick, because that's one of the things, is I'm happy to be with you, particularly because of this transportation proposal coming up, because it's a good thing to do, but people have normal objections. There's things they hear about or information they don't have yet, and that's why I want to be with you. So we can walk through those objections, let's answer them, and let's have safer roads. And so in honor of that, I wanted to bring you a piece of bridge.
Wow.
So this is for you. And what this is a piece of concrete that fell off a Michigan bridge. And it gives you an idea of how scary it is. If this was to hit your vehicle or go through your windshield, it's terrifying. And so as people drive around, they see that plywood underneath bridges. It's there to help things like this from falling on your vehicle.
One of the newest commercials from the folks who are supporting, and that you are in support of this proposal, actually shows a vehicle that's had a similar piece that has gone through the front glass, the windshield, which is a frightening prospect for a guy who has a couple of little kids with him very often. I mean, it sends shivers down your spine. You and I have talked for the better part of 3 years about the condition of roads and bridges, and you have found, as have I, almost universal acceptance that the roads need work.
Yeah, no one likes our roads in Michigan. I mean, I've done hundreds of town halls, you know that, and I've asked the question, anyone like our roads in Michigan? I'm still looking for that person.
Right. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's been hard to get there after a legislature that was not able to come up with a plan for several of those sessions, then into the lame duck session. I want to talk about this. I want to go through this plan 101 because I was there. I know how they got there. I know why they got there. But let me tell you what people say to me.
Sure.
Rick, you talk to the governor all the time, and he's talked about roads for a long time. And he says it's going to take $1.2 billion to fix the roads. And then all of a sudden, when the deal finally comes out, there's a whole bunch of other stuff attached to it, and we don't ever remember hearing the governor talk about that stuff. So if you could, walk me through the provisions of this and why, from your perspective, those things that are included are important, because some people, as you have already heard, will say, just fix the roads, save all that other stuff for later.
And I appreciate that. And this was a good compromise. This was done by leaders of both parties, both chambers, and myself working together. And it's a good policy outcome. And when you stop and see, the first thing I'll share with people is quite often, this looks very complex, and there's some complexity to it, but it's actually simplifying our system. And that's the best way to enter this, is when you talk about, we need $1.2 billion for transportation. So let's start with where that comes from. Most of it would come from paying at the pump on the gas taxes that they pay. Currently in Michigan today, we have 19 cents per gallon. It's a flat amount. It's been that way since '97. The rest of what's going to taxes to the state is our retail sales tax. So we charge that 6% retail sales tax that you pay on other goods and services on fuel. And that's the issue, that what we want to do is make it so everything at the pump goes to transportation. So if we did that and we simply added another 23 cents, which is what we're talking about, it would make our gas prices too high if we left the retail sales tax. So this is where we're reducing complexity. We're saying, okay, let's make everything at the pump. It'll go from 19 to 42 cents. Let's remove the retail sales tax piece. Make that go away to keep our gas prices competitive, and 100% of what's paid at the pump goes to transportation. That's a good answer. Now the challenge is when you remove the retail sales tax, now you've created a hole in the budgets for schools and local government.
And about how much is that worth?
Yeah, that's worth, well, if you do the math, it's quite a bit of money in terms of, it's not $1.2 billion, but it's several hundreds of millions of dollars. So you created a hole in their budget. So how do you solve that? Well, the simplest way is to increase the sales tax. And what was done was to go from 6 to 7%. And when people ask, did the legislature walk away from their obligation? No, they actually had to do a 2/3 vote of both chambers to put it on the ballot. That's difficult to do. You know how hard that is, a 2/3 vote, Rick? So when you go for a 1 cent increase on the sales tax, you make the schools and local government whole, but in fact they end up with some additional resources. And this is to your point, where are those going? So if you walk through those pieces, the first piece is there's about $100 million extra going to local government. I don't view that as an issue at all because in fact we made some serious cuts back in 2011. So that $100 million roughly brings us back to even with where we were back in 2011 for local government. So that's really restoring something that had to disappear during the difficult budget years. The second piece is we're restoring a tax break in terms of giving a tax break to lower income people for about $260 million. The earned income tax credit will be restored. It was cut back in 2011, it would get restored. So another restoration. And in fact, that's important because with the retail sales tax going up, that tends to hit lower income people harder. So that's appropriate tax relief in my view. The one net new number that really is out there is really $300 million additional to the school aid fund. And it goes to the school aid fund, which again, if you think about it, most of us want to invest more in education. And it's for K-12, it's for community colleges. One area that's a key priority that I think we all agree on is career tech education and the need for the skilled trades. So it increases additional resources for that, which I've been doing in our budget anyway. I proposed the $35 million or more extra money just this last year for the skilled trades. So this is in the right direction we need to go to give us good, well-paying jobs for Michiganders.
I got an email from Brian this past week, and I don't know what Brian would think about $300 million more for education, though I assume that most people think that investing in education is a good thing. And an earned income tax credit, which is a good thing, particularly for working folks who are out there every day, just like all of us, but they're still at a level that that kind of tax relief can help them. Again, I'm not sure that people would disagree, but here's what Brian had a problem with. He said, if you want to fix the roads, I'm paraphrasing. If you want to fix the roads, fix the roads. If you want to do that other stuff, then do that other stuff. But why not separate them? Because some people are confused. Not because the plan is so confusing, you explained it quite clearly, but they're confused is why you had to do it all together. Now, I'm going to offer a suggestion with which you may disagree. You did it because politics is the art of the possible, and the deal that you could get in that lame duck session included all of this other stuff, and that's how you got to the 2/3 vote. And isn't that largely how this came about?
Yeah, well, that's part of good government, is people coming together. Again, there were very different perspectives going into that meeting, and there was compromise involved. Compromise is not a dirty word, and I think it was good legislation, and this is good policy. And that's why I appreciate the opportunity to walk through each piece, because if you walk through each piece, there's a good rationale for each piece that is a good answer for Michigan long term. So that's where I hope people do support it. Again, let's first and foremost focus in on safer roads. The $1.2 billion is critically important. The other pieces, in terms of how meaningful or how people feel them, varies dramatically. But in the end, this is good policy for Michigan. And there is not another option. Doing nothing would have been the very worst thing at all.
I want to come back to that because there's a commercial I want to talk to you about, but let's go back and go through this piece by piece. There is what we think of as a sales tax, that's 6% that we pay on every dollar at the pump. That will go away.
Yes.
Then the 19-cent tax that has been paid on, if you will, on the back end will move to the front end, to the retail. And how much will that grow?
That'll go to about 42 cents.
So that's going to increase the price of a gallon of gas by about 20 cents minus the 6% per dollar.
Yeah,
right?
which is within a nickel or so of roughly being equal. Again, the retail sales tax varies based on gas prices. So there'd be additional cost today, but if you use last year's average, it would be average gas prices. You wouldn't notice any difference, really.
So to the opponents of this that say taxes on gas and that gas prices per gallon are going to go up at least 40 cents per gallon, you would say they are wrong.
Right. Correct. That would be inaccurate.
All right. So now that's been moved to the wholesale side, but it has the flexibility of going up with on a certain percentile basis?
It will go up at cost of living.
Okay.
And so the good part is we're solving the problem that we had last time. In '97, when they did the 19 cents a gallon, it was a flat 19 cents. So it had no ability to change. And so what we've lost is a lot of buying power over the last 18 years or so. So if we would have done that back then, we probably wouldn't be having this discussion today.
All right. And so now the 6% that we take off of fuel will be backfilled by raising by an additional percentage point to 7% on all of the other things that are currently taxable under a sales or use tax. And that will make up the difference, plus a little bit, as you explained, and where that money's going to go. All right. So that's the deal that you could come up with, and that's the deal that you're asking people to vote for in May. This is emblematic of how you're asking them to vote, because you say that roads are a real safety matter. And the commercials for the yes folks get right down to the heart of it. And some people say it's a scare tactic, that they're really generating some fear. I mean, I got to tell you, when I saw the video of that windshield with that hole in it, it was frightening. Is that part of the motivation?
It's not about scaring people. It's about making sure everyone understands the situation and how serious it is. And I'll give you an illustration, Rick. This isn't something new. We've been talking about this. I've been talking about this for the last 2 or 3 years, since 2012. I did a special message talking about the need for this funding. But remember last year, I came out and visited 196 right near 131. We went underneath a bridge, and we were looking at the temporary supports they were having to do on that bridge. That's one of the busiest crossings in the state. And I can tell you, when I was underneath that bridge, I don't know if you remember, we had to put on the vest and a hard hat. I was happy to be wearing a hard hat. I'm serious. I mean, that was a case where it wasn't I wasn't trying to scare anyone, but you worry about these things when you're underneath some of these bridges.
When you look at the condition of Michigan roads and bridges, and at this point there's really not much point in arguing about how they got there, why we got there. It's disinvestment, it's whatever else it is. When you talk to people about the safety issue, there's obviously an economic issue, a business issue. There's all of that goes along with it too. Not to leave out the cost that it is on our vehicles, which we can talk about. Do you think it resonates enough for people to go out and vote to increase taxes on themselves, which is not a natural thing for people to do, I don't think, in a lot of ways, and turn out for an election that many people would otherwise just take a pass on, because this is a low turnout election?
Yeah, no, I think it'll still be a lower turnout election, but I think people will turn out, because if you stop and think about it, we start with that original premise. Everybody in Michigan hates our roads. And the question is why do you hate them so much? Well, a big chunk of that is the safety issue. And so hopefully that's a good motivator to say it's worth turning out, because isn't it better to get a solution? The other part people should keep in mind is this would be a job creator, not in terms of just the construction jobs, but this would help our economy long term. Better infrastructure does lead to more jobs. In addition to that is, you mentioned the repair cost issue. We pay more in repair costs because of road damage than the surrounding states by $80 to $100 and some dollars, depending on which state. That's a lot of money a year. And you can talk to a first person. How many people do you know had a blown tire or bent rim in the last year? That costs several $100s. Wouldn't you rather invest it in terms of better roads than having to pay it for repairs?
What does this cost per person? Do you have a breakdown?
Again, it's really the sales tax piece that most likely will affect people, so you can roughly look at it as the 1 cent increase on whatever your consumption is of goods in Michigan.
From the governor's perspective, raising the sales tax to 7%, allowing the gas tax to go over to the wholesale side and double, all is about fixing roads and the other priorities that he laid out. But there are some people, even some of the governor's supporters, that don't agree. We'll talk about that when we come back to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. Governor Rick Snyder is our guest today. He's talking about raising taxes to try to fix roads. It is an issue that doesn't set well with everyone, including some of the governor's more traditional supporters. I know that not everybody that would be considered a typical supporter has gotten on board. Michigan Chamber staying neutral. Have you heard from people like the auto dealers, places like that, where a 1% sales tax could be problematic?
Well, I've heard from individual dealers and a number of supportive. I've actually had dealers tell me stories about how they actually make money on replacing tires and rims, but they're actually happy to see this because they know it's a safety issue and they're out on the roads. From a personal perspective. The good part about this is we've got a huge coalition supporting this, because this isn't my effort, it's Safe Roads Yes, and there's a great website, saferoadsyes.com, to go to get more information. But this coalition now has over 100 different organizations part of it. And it's a wonderful coalition, because if you look, it includes a lot of the business community, includes many chamber organizations, the Small Business Association of Michigan, but it includes many union organizations. The MEA is part of it, the AFL-CIO. And when you talk about the laborers, the operating engineers, people that know these issues are all in favor of this. So it's a huge coalition of business and labor working together.
I want to make it clear that I don't think that you are spending your late night hours in the basement writing commercials for this coalition. But nonetheless, because you're behind this, I've got a couple of questions. We talked about the fear factor. We talked about the kind of graphic example that we saw in at least one of these commercials, and talked about those commercials that talk about Michigan roads being in bad shape. And again, we think that's a given. There's a radio commercial that's running that I find fascinating. And it starts off by a man or woman, one of the two, saying, "Whoa, did you see that person? They swerved and all, to miss that pothole and almost hit that SUV." But it concludes by saying, "Yeah, there are a lot of things about this proposal I don't like either, but it's the best that you can do. And if we vote no, then it'll just go back to the legislature and they'll come up with something that looks the same or even worse." That's kind of low praise to try to get somebody out to vote for something like, "I don't like this thing, but it's the best we can do," and it's by the people that are supporting.
Well, again, people are just trying to make it clear, I think, that if we don't do this, there isn't a good option sitting there that's readily available. Because part of the challenge you get is when you put this on the ballot, and if the voters vote no, I think it's likely you're going to find legislators even more hesitant to vote for something, to vote for a tax increase after the voters just voted it down. So when people ask, I say we go back to square minus 2. It's not going back to square 1. It's actually probably going backwards in some degree. And the cost of going backwards is dramatic. Because one of the other features that's out there, Rick, if you spend $1 to repair a road that's in good condition, if you have to wait until it goes poor and you have to repair it, it'll cost you probably about 6 times as much. So this bill is only going to keep going up. It's $1.2 billion today. If we wait 2 or 3 years, that bill is going to be a whole lot higher.
When you think about the people that are in the legislature that voted for this in some cases they didn't, you get a lot of lukewarm responses when I talk to legislators about how fully they're going to support it. Do you have a core group of elected Senate and House members that are kind of out talking this thing? I know that Director Snyder is doing a lot of town halls and explaining, and I know that those are being hosted by some legislators. Do you have enough of those folks who are seriously on board to make this the kind of bona fide effort?
Yeah, we've got a lot of legislators out there. The leadership has been very strongly supportive in terms of both chambers, both parties. So again, this is a good bipartisan effort. There's a couple other things. One thing in particular that I think helps this is we're beefing up some of the things, because sometimes people wonder how efficient we've been doing road work in our state. Have we really been doing the repairs that we needed to have done? And the answer is not always, because we didn't have enough resources. We didn't have enough money. If we get enough dollar resources to do the rebuilds the way they should be, we also have a number of laws going with this to increase warranties for roads. Michigan's actually a leader in having more warranties than any other state, but this would increase that. More competitive bidding. It would require preventive maintenance plans from the state and our largest counties on how we're going to keep roads in good shape. So there's a lot of things to show that these resources would be smartly used.
When you look at the plan in total, and I think we've touched on most everything, we did not talk about registration fees. There would be an elimination of the depreciation on those fees?
Yeah, what happens, Rick, is right now when you buy a vehicle, you pay the registration fee the first year. It actually goes down for the next 2 or 3 years. We'd get rid of that drop down. So it wouldn't go up from that original amount, but it would stay flat.
So now here is this ballot proposal. You have just said you don't believe there is a plan B. I talked to at least one member of the legislature who has all of these different plans, but the problem with that is getting 19 votes in the Senate and 56 over in the House. And I think for most observers, they would agree that you're right, that if this doesn't pass in May, there's not going to be anything that is immediately on the front burner that you can replace it with. So, in addition to this group of people supporting this that are raising some money, there is another group, and they too are pretty active. They haven't raised nearly as much money, but they are organized and they are going to oppose this. If they start raising significant amounts of money, how much danger does that put this proposal in? Because at some point, those commercials have an impact.
Yeah, well, that's part of democracy. Again, right now they haven't been very active in terms of TV commercials. That would make it more challenging. The good part is I think the Safe Roads Yes Coalition is doing a good job of fundraising, putting commercials on. You've seen commercials both on TV and radio. And a lot of this is going around to help get out the vote. And this is where it's great to have such a broad coalition of management and labor coming together to really turn out the vote in May, because typically it would be lower turnout.
One of the things you've done since you've taken office is that you were adamant that you wanted budgets done. You wanted them done in May. And I think the first one came in maybe very early June, but it was close. They have been predictably very early all through this process. As this budget process is going along, this has to create some uncertainty for legislators. And I know, I've talked with, we've had both of the appropriations chairs on here, and we have an upcoming show with a Republican and Democrat appropriator. We're going to talk with them. But does this change significantly the way you or the legislature should look at the budget going forward, or is this just that one part of it?
I think this can work very well. This shouldn't be a major impediment to getting the budget done in a timely fashion, because this is something that's additive resources. So it's relatively straightforward because it's really going to safer roads is the biggest chunk of the funds here. And the other parts we already talked about. So they're fairly well defined. So there aren't a lot of extra decisions that need to be made. So I think this would work fine. The other part I'd really like to do is let's get more road projects going in May, as quickly as possible after this is over. So let's start improving Michigan roads as quickly as possible.
How would that work? This money wouldn't start coming in until October, if I understand it. That would be in the new fiscal year, right?
Right, and then part of the money will actually be used to repay debt that we took on for roads back in the early 2000s, which I think is a very good use. But there are cases where we could look at advancing some projects, doing some shorter term financing to allow us to get more projects underway this summer.
When you look at the program, the proposal overall, when you look at all of the different tentacles of it, and you're going around and talking to people, and I know that that others are doing town halls, does this become the most important pillar of your administration, or at least up to now?
No. Again, it's really important. I wouldn't say it's the most important because I'm very proud of the other things we've done. And that goes back to being fiscally responsible, 4 years of balanced budgets, paying down our long-term debt. We've reformed, over $10 billion of Michigan debt. Detroit, there's so many good things we've done. We've redone our tax structure, Healthy Michigan. This is another important piece, but it's not the only one, or I wouldn't say the one. But I'm proud to be out there campaigning for this.
I'm going to shift gears in the couple of minutes that we have left, so don't hit me with this. But here's one of the interesting things that is going to happen at the Supreme Court. They're going to talk about the Affordable Care Act, and it kind of plays into Healthy Michigan, because there is a question that has been brought before the court about health exchanges, or about the exchanges for health care. And if you don't have the right components, then you don't have the subsidies that go along with the Affordable Care Act. And most believe that those subsidies are the only thing that will make the Affordable Care Act work, because it has to be spread around broadly. As it is now, Michigan would not be in the subsidy group if the Supreme Court rules in favor of that case. Is that true?
Yes.
So if, and I'm not predicting at all, you never second guess the Supreme Court, but if they should decide that the law is as the law is written to the letter of the law, that it wasn't a mistake as some claim, what would that do to Healthy Michigan? What would that do to Michigan's health care program?
Yeah, well, Healthy Michigan is the Medicaid piece, so that should continue. It's really the exchange piece, which are for people at a higher income level, but there's 200,000-300,000 people in that category, and losing that subsidy probably would cause the program to break down in some fashion. So I think most likely what you'd see is that there would be a need for federal action. And that's something that, again, we've got great congressional delegation people. Fred Upton in particular is chair of the House committee. That would probably be the frontline committee having to address that. So it'd be interesting and challenging, because most likely they'd want to make some reforms of the Affordable Care Act. Yeah, so that would be a major challenge between the White House and Congress.
Yeah, one more thing for us to follow in Washington. I can't let you out of here without asking you about your health, because we know that you had an unfortunate turn with your leg, little hospitalization time, but you're back and walking without the aid of anything except a boot. How do you feel?
Yeah, doing great. Yeah, doing much better. I'm hoping you're going to get the boot off in the next week or two and get back to my normal fast-paced walking.
All right, Governor, as always, thank you for your time.
Great to be with you.
So there's the governor's thought about how to fix Michigan roads, as well as putting money in some other areas. There is another school of thought. We'll talk about that when we come back to The Point. Of course, there is another side to the whole issue about raising the sales tax, increasing the gas tax, and all that goes with this plan. In 3 weeks, you'll hear from Paul Mitchell leading the opposition to The Point.